Hello everyone and welcome to this video. Today I'm going to give you an introduction to Mediator pattern using MediatR component. For those who don't know me, my name is Foad Alavi and I upload 2 videos every week about software development and the topics that I really like about .NET development. This Mediator pattern is something that you need to have a good understanding about that, and after that we are going to discuss how to implement that in .NET Core 8. Let's start. The best way to understand something is to know why we need it. We need to understand the problem first, and after that we can find a good solution for it. The problem here, let's assume that I am going to address a house hunting process. We have some people, and these people, they are looking for a house to rent, and there are some properties out there, some apartments, some complexes, some houses, and they are all looking for them. And if I want to demonstrate the relation between each person to the properties, you will see something like that. The first person here, he needs to send a request to all the property owners, and the type and the format of the request should be varied, because maybe one of them wants you to call them, another one wants you to send an email, the other one, maybe he's an old guy and he wants you to just come by and negotiate with him face to face. It will be the same for the rest of the people. And just look at the diagram, handling the relationship and the actions between all the actors here in this scenario is not possible. How to do that? The first thing that we need to do is to just make this diagram a bit cleaner. How to do that? By placing all actors, all people on the right side or left side, and place all the houses on the other side and draw these lines. Let's do that and see how it works. Yeah. All the people are in the left side and all houses are here. Now let's draw the relationship between them. Okay, it is better, but it is still messy. Handling them is almost impossible. And if I ask you to please be sure that all houses are receiving requests from all people here, it is almost impossible to be sure, because you need to check. For example, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 houses here, and for each of them you need to be sure that they are sending a request for 7 different houses. If you want to model it in a program and write a code for it, it will be a nightmare. But how can we solve this issue in real life? Let's go to the next slide. The best solution that we have is to use a real estate agency or real estate agent. I personally don't like to work with real estate agencies and real estate agents. I will mention the reason why a bit later, but it is good because instead of each person sending a lot of requests to all the house owners, they just send a request to the real estate agent, and real estate agent, based on the type of the request, will send it to the house and get the response about the offer. The reason that I don't like the real estate agencies and real estate agents is that it is more expensive and it is more time taking, because this agent, he or she needs to get the request from you, process the request, realize what is the communication standard with the owner of each of the houses, send the request to the house owner, and discuss the rental agreement with them. And if they approve or reject your offer, they need to process it again and send it back to you. Let's see what I mean by the process and the protocol of communication. For example, for this one, you need to call. For this one, you need to drop an email for the owner. For this one, a face-to-face conversation, and so on for rest of them. But how it works? Let's just concentrate on one candidate for renting a house. I need to name the houses here to distinguish between them: house 1, apartment 1, and so on. This candidate should send a request to the agent. This agent and this client, they should have a standard to communicate. For example, they should have a standard about which of these houses, which of these properties are they talking about. Then they need to give each of them a name or call them by the address. I mean, the client needs to send the house name or the ID or some identifier for each of the properties to the agent and send some parameters. For example, in our example, we need to tell them how much are we willing to pay for this rental property, 2,000 euro, 1,500 euro, and so on. And now this real estate agent, he should have a folder for each type, for each request. And for each request, he or she needs to know that how to handle it. By how to handle it, is it a call, email, face-to-face contact, or what? And for having a naming convention, we have request and handler. And this real estate agent, which is act as a mediator between the people who are candidate for renting a house and the property owners, should just have a mapping between the request type and how to handle them. And for the sake of naming convention, we are just adding a label to the folder which tells us how to handle it like that. The request name plus handler. Congratulations, now you understand what is the issue that we need to solve and how to solve it in the real life. But how to use it, how to use this mediator pattern in .NET. There is a component that does everything for us. Let's see it. We have component 1. We have MediatR or mediator component in between, and we have some other components. If one component wants to send a request to each of them, this component just needs to send a request to Mediator. Mediator is responsible for receive the request based on the request type and the properties of that request. It is going to map it to a handler. You know, the request name is component to request, and the name of the handler, because of the naming convention that I mentioned, should be component to request handler. Now that we know just by looking at the name which handler belongs to but request, and inside this handler we know the protocol and what to do with component 2. Call them, email them, face to face. You know, in real world it is something like that, but in your program it might be call to a database, send a request via API, or just read something from a file or things like that. Another thing that I really like to mention about Mediator and how the request and request handler works is in the previous slide I show you that we are just passing the name of the houses. In real world, you know, I live in Netherlands. The first time that I wanted to rent a house here, I found the house in a street which was called Graafschapstraat. You know, even pronouncing it for me is really hard. And I wanted to tell the real estate agent that I want to send an offer for this property. It was really hard because I needed to spell it for him. And when you are telling someone behind the phone that you are going to rent a property in a street that you even don't know how to pronounce the name, it is really hard. In .NET world and programming world, we use type-safing methods. And in type-safing methods, instead of passing a string, we pass a type. And what they did here, they ask you to create a type for each request. And the values that you need to pass along inside this request should be some properties inside that type, which means you need to create a class for each type of the request that you have. And for each value that you need to pass with your request, you need to create a property inside that class. And you need to have another class. This class is for handling this request. Let's go to Visual Studio and see how it works. The project that I prepared for today is the house hunting API. Let's run it. We have one endpoint, get houses. If I try it, it is going to return all the houses that I have. And we have another one, get house by budget. If I try it and pass my budget, it will return the house which I can rent using my budget. Let's take a look at the project structure. I have 4 different projects here. Mediator is like a real estate agent. As I told you, it is type taking and costly to use a real estate agent. Using Mediator pattern is costly as well because it makes your application slower. If you don't have a really huge application with a lot of dependencies that I showed you, please do not use Mediator. There is a trend these days that everyone try to use clean architecture, Mediator, CQRS, but it is not a good thing. Based on my experience, 90% of the projects which developer developed using CQRS, Mediator, and clean architecture can be done in one single project or in traditional 3-layer application, but they just because like to experiment something, they just jump to use these kind of techniques and patterns. Okay, the reason that I have 4 different projects is that I'm trying to demonstrate that for a complex project like this one, you should go for it. I have a model. I have a house model here, just one. I have a business. In the business, I have house hunting service. And in this interface, I have 2 different methods, get house async and get house async with accepting a budget. And there is an implementation for that one. We are not doing anything fancy, just calling the repository and get the houses from repository. And if I check the DAL layer or data access layer, I have one iRepository and a repository. And this repository is just returning the houses based on the static value that I typed here. I'm not sending any request to any database because it is meaningless. In the next video that I'm going to explain CQRS, we will use database and Mediator together. Let's see how my API works. In the API, I have a controller. In this controller, I'm just accepting iHouse hunting service from the business layer. And the dependency injection behind the scene is going to instantiate one object out of this interface and place it in _service field. I'm just using this field using the method for get house async and return the result to the client. Let's see how dependency injection works here. For registering my services, I am using 2 extension methods because for registering services which don't belong to your project, it is a common practice not to register them inside this program.cs file directly, and it is better to wrap it inside your project in a configuration folder and create just one extension method. This is an extension method. It is going to add register business services method to iService collection type, which means that when you are using iService collection objects, by pressing a dot, you will see this extension method and just add the service that you have in this project, in this business project here. I'm adding just one service here and do exactly the same thing for my data access layer. In my data access layer, I'm just mapping these services. If I go back to the program.cs, you can see that this is an extension method. This is an extension method over iService collection. And I created my own extension methods over iService collection for register data access layer services and registering the business services. It is working and it is fine. But I want to just use Mediator in my API instead of calling business by myself. I want to call Mediator and let Mediator to handle this request for me. If you remember the PowerPoint that I showed you, first thing that I need to do is to create a request. But another thing before that, the real first thing is to install the NuGet package. Let me right click on the dependencies, go to manage NuGets, browse. Good. You can see that we have a MediatR, let's pronounce it Mediator, and Mediator extension Microsoft Dependency Injection. Before version 12 for ASP.NET applications, you needed to install this dependency, but this one is deprecated, and as you can see, it says this package version is deprecated, use Mediator instead. Then let's start with Mediator. By installing this package, you will see that this Mediator package reference is added to your project CS file. Let me add this one to my business layer as well. You can do it like that by manually just add it here, or you can, or you can just use the NuGet interface and add Mediator to your project. Can you remember that I said we need to have some types for request, and we need to have a mapping between the request and request handlers? The main question is where to place these request types and where to place this mapping. If I go back to my API project, you will see that the API project has references to DAL, model, and business layer and business project, which means that I can place the requests and handlers in API or in any of them. In this video, I'm not going to talk about the best practices about where to place it. In the clean architecture series of videos that I'm going to create, I will explain it in detail. For now, let's just put it inside the business layer, and because we have access to business layer here, it will be fine. For the sake of findability, I'm going to create a folder here and call it requests. Let me check it. Yeah, it is fine. And another one. And let's just call it request handlers. Request handlers. Fine. I need to create a class. The first request that I want to create, the first request is for getting the houses. Let's call it get all houses request and make it public. Mediator needs to know that it is a request, and how to do that, we need to tell Mediator that Mediator, this is the request that I have, by just implement one interface, iRequest interface. iRequest, which is coming from Mediator. And this iRequest interface is a generic one. We need to pass the expected return value, expected return type of this request. I'm sending a request to somewhere to get all houses. Then I expect to receive a list of houses. Let's type it here. A list of houses. Fine. It does the job for me. And let me just copy this get all request name, and inside the request handlers, I need to create a handler for it. And as I mentioned, the naming convention is to use the request name plus handler and just place it here. Let's make it public as well. And this one needs to implement iRequest handler from Mediator. This is a generic type, and we need to tell it what is the type of the request. We have a request, we have a handler. iRequest handler interface accept the type of the request because it needs to map it behind the scene. The type is get house request. And what is the type of the response? As we mentioned there, it should be a list of the houses. For now, just think about request and request handler in a way that they have just a one-to-one relationship, which means that one request can be handled just by one handler, and one handler is here only to handle one request. Let's implement this one, implement this interface. Okay, public task list house handle get request, get house request, and cancellation token. Wow, you know, it is really hard to memorize everything, but you don't need to memorize it because every time you can press Ctrl dot and implement the interface. In real world scenarios, in real projects, first you need to handle the request here and get the result. After that, using some mapper components like automapper, you need to convert the result to the acceptable type that the requester wants. For example, convert one entity to DTO and then return it. But here I just return it directly, and let's await it, because in the business layer, let me show it to you. In this business layer for getting the houses, this house is an async method. Let's go back to handler. I want to use the house hunting service, but using a concrete type is not a good practice. Then I need to inject it. Let's use Mediator for creating a constructor, and I house hunting services, and let's name it service, and just create a field for this service. And now I can use it easily, get house asyncs, and it will do the job for me. Let me just remove it, remove the unnecessary usings. And yeah, it is working. But I have another endpoint. You can see here that I have get house async and get house async with budget, which means I have two types of requests. First, you may think that is it possible to use the same get house request? No, it is not possible, because we need to pass something along with this type, which means that we need to have a property here. You may say, okay, let's create a property here and pass it null or 0 for the time that we want to have all the houses. But remember what I told you. For now, just think that it is one-to-way relationship. One request, one handler. If you have one request with parameter which is nullable, sometimes for getting all the houses and sometimes for getting just one house, you know, it is not the way that we want to use Mediator for now. Then let's create another request. I'm going to name this class get houses by budget request. Let's make it public and use iRequest again. And it is going to return a list of houses again. But it needs to accept a property. And the property, I'm going to call it, it should be float, and the name should be budget. It is one way of creating a type of request. But the easiest way to do that is, instead of creating this class, create a record, public record with the same name. And in record, we have a float property and it is called budget. The only difference between a record and a class is that everything inside a record is read-only, which means that it is a property, but instead of set, it has init, something like that. Using record is better because in runtime, it is a bit faster because the way that the compiler is going to store it in stack and heaps. Let's change it and see how it works. We need to add a semicolon at the end as well. Let's change the other request as well to public record and add a semicolon at the end. It should do the job for me. And create a handler. This handler is for get house by budget request handler. It should be public as well. And implement I request handler. Oh, what I typed. I request handler. The request type is get house by budget request, and it will return a list of houses. Just like that. And let's just implement the interface. I need to return something, but that something is the business, is a house hunting service. I need to injecting I house hunting service, and let's call it service and generate the field, and then await service dot get houses. And now we need to pass the budget. The budget is a part of a field, a property of this request that I'm receiving here. Handler accepts two parameters. The first one is the request, and inside the request I have the budget, and the second one is cancellation token. This cancellation token is a funny thing because for all async requests you can pass, and you should pass a cancellation token. We need it because in a chain of calling asynchronous methods, if you want to cancel it in between, you cannot cancel just one of the method and let the rest of the processes to continue. You need to cancel all of them. If you are interested about how async works and what is a cancellation token, just write it down in the comment section and I will create a video and explain it for you. Okay, I have everything ready. I have my request, I have my request handlers. Now it is time to go to the controller and start using Mediator instead of using my services. I need to inject it first. I don't need this one anymore. Mediator, and let's call it Mediator and create a field for it. Create and assign a field for Mediator. Nice. I don't need services. And now it's time to use this Mediator. Easy. Mediator.send, because I'm going to send something to Mediator. And what should I do? I need to tell it what is the request that I want. The request was get all houses request. But it is just a type. I need to instantiate it because sometimes I need to pass along a field or pass along a value to it. Like here, let me just copy it and paste it here. I need to use get houses by budget request, and I need to pass the budget. It is the reason that I need to instantiate this type. And let's pass the budget. Fine. I have an application. I created the request. I created the request handlers. Request handlers know how to deal with the request. Instead of calling the method directly, I'm calling the Mediator. But how? And when Mediator realizes that which request belongs to what request handler. Honestly, at application startup, when we register all of our services, we need to add another step and tell the mediator to look for these mappings, to look for every iRequest implementation and iRequest handler implementation. And based on the first value, based on the first, let me open it, based on the first type that you have for each request handler using reflection, look inside that assembly and find a request which is flagged with iRequest interface, which has the same name. It is a lot of reflection work behind the scene. Let's go back to the project. I added Mediator. I can use builder.services.add mediators, add mediator. And here I need to say config. Previously, before version 12, you could just say it is the assembly without passing a config. But now we need to have a method config and then config dot load assembly from assembly, sorry, register services from assembly, and pass the assembly here. What is the assembly? That we have all these mappings, all these request and request handlers. It is my house hunting.bees. Can you remember that I said if something is related to injecting services of another assembly, another project, it is better to do it inside that project? Then let me just cut it. We have register business services here. Let's go there. And if I close everything, you will see that it is inside the business project. And now I can easily use the service collection, add mediator, config, load assembly. Keep it in mind that all actions, all registrations, all methods related to one assembly should be done in that assembly. You can just wrap them inside a method and let the other application to just call the method, but do not implement it inside the program.cs of your API. And easily here I can just say I have an assembly and get executing assembly. Yeah, get executing assembly, which is the current assembly that we are using right now. Let's save it and let's save everything. Let me open my console application and let it run my application again and open the application and see if it works or not. Let me refresh it. It is working. Let's try it out. It is returning the values exactly the same way that I expected. And for the budget, let's try it again with 2,000 euros. And it is returning the result. Okay, thank you everyone for watching this video. It was an introduction to Mediator pattern and how to use MediatR component in .NET 8 applications. If you like this video, do not forget to like it. Please, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, subscribe to my channel now and hit the bell to get notified about the new videos that I will upload. Enjoy your life as a developer and keep learning new things.